The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, as Norah Livingston stood trembling on the auction block, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin. The year was 1878, and despite the supposed progress of the nation following the Civil War, human trafficking remained a brutal reality in certain lawless pockets of the West. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, carving clean paths through the dust as the auctioneer rattled off her supposed attributes like she was nothing more than livestock. "Fine young woman here, gentlemen. 22 years old, healthy, educated enough to read and write. Good for housework, cooking, and whatever else you might fancy." The leering auctioneer's voice boomed across the makeshift market square, drawing chuckles from the crowd of rough-looking men who had gathered for the illegal auction. Norah had never imagined her life would come to this. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been traveling west by stagecoach from Boston to join her aunt in San Francisco after her parents' deaths left her alone in the world. The attack had been swift and merciless, bandits ambushing the coach, killing the driver and the male passengers, and taking her captive. Days of being passed between different groups of outlaws had left her disoriented and terrified before she ended up here, in this mining town that seemed to operate outside the bounds of law and human decency. "Do I hear $50? $50 for this fine specimen?" The bidding began, each call from the crowd causing Norah to flinch as if physically struck. She kept her eyes downcast, unable to bear looking at the men who viewed her as property to be purchased. Her once fine blue traveling dress hung in tatters around her slender frame, and her auburn hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. Despite her circumstances, she stood tall, clinging desperately to the last shreds of her dignity. $100. Shouted a grizzled miner with a gray beard stained yellow around the mouth. $120, called another, a corpulent man with sweat staining his shirt. The bidding continued, rising steadily as Norah's hopes sank. She knew what fate awaited her once sold a life of servitude and abuse. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer that death might claim her before she could be claimed by any of these men. $300. The new voice cut through the clamor like a knife deep, authoritative and calm. A hush fell over the crowd as they turned to see who had placed such a substantial bid. Norah's eyes snapped open, seeking the source of the voice despite herself. A tall man stood at the edge of the crowd, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his dark Stetson. Unlike the miners and drifters who populated the auction, he wore a clean, if dust-covered, black coat over a white shirt. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the well-worn holster suggesting a man familiar with its use. Even from the distance, Norah could see his eyes piercing blue that seemed to evaluate the entire scene with cold calculation. $300 going once. The auctioneer called, stunned by the high bid for what was, in his mind, simply another unfortunate girl to be sold off. No one countered the offer. The tall stranger had effectively ended the bidding with his unexpected entrance and generous sum. $300 going twice. Sold, to the gentleman in the black hat. Norah's heart pounded painfully against her ribs as she was roughly pulled down from the platform and dragged toward her new owner. Up close, she could see him more clearly, a man perhaps in his early 30s, with several days' worth of stubble darkening a strong jaw. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and a thin scar ran along his left cheekbone. He looked every inch the dangerous frontiersman, yet something in his expression made her hesitate to categorize him with the other brutes at the auction. The auctioneer thrust Norah's bound wrists toward the man. "She's all yours, mister. No refunds if she proves troublesome." The stranger handed over $300 without comment, his eyes never leaving Norah's face. She stared back defiantly, determined that whatever horrors awaited her, she would face them with the same strength her parents had always instilled in her. Then, to her complete astonishment, the man reached out and untied the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free," he said simply, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Norah blinked, certain she had misunderstood. "What? You're free," he repeated, a little louder this time. "I'm not in the business of owning people. My name is Hayes Cooper. I'll see you safely out of this town, but after that, your life is your own." For a moment, Norah couldn't process his words. Freedom seemed an impossible concept after weeks of captivity and terror. She rubbed her raw wrists, wincing at the pain, and stared at the man Hayes Cooper with suspicion. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. "Why would you spend such money just to free me?" Hayes glanced around, noticing that several onlookers were watching them with interest. "Let's get somewhere safe before we talk." He removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders, covering her torn dress. "Can you walk?" Norah nodded, though in truth she wasn't certain her trembling legs would support her. Nevertheless, she managed to fall into step beside him as he guided her away from the auction block and down the dusty main street of Castle Dome. "My horse is at the livery," Hayes explained quietly. "We'll get you there, then out of town before anyone thinks too hard about what just happened." They walked in silence, Norah hyper-aware of the stares that followed them. Some men leered, others looked disappointed, and a few seemed confused by Hayes's actions. She clutched his coat tightly around herself, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of tobacco, leather, and something indefinably masculine. The livery stable offered blessed shade after the brutal desert sun. Hayes led her to a stall where a magnificent chestnut gelding stood, its coat gleaming even in the dim light. "This is Rusty," Hayes said, patting the horse's neck. "He's sturdy enough to carry us both until we can get you a mount of your own." Norah leaned against a post, her legs finally giving out. "I don't understand," she said, her voice stronger now that they were alone. "Men don't just spend money to free strangers. What do you want from me?" Hayes was busy checking his saddle, but he paused at her question. His blue eyes met hers directly. "Not every man in this territory is a monster, miss." "Livingston. Norah Livingston," she supplied cautiously. "Miss Livingston," he nodded. "Some of us still believe in basic human decency. What was happening in that square was wrong. I had the means to stop it, so I did." Norah had learned the hard way not to trust easily. "And now what? You expect me to believe you want nothing in return," Hayes sighed, finishing with the saddle straps before turning to face her fully. "What I want is to get you to safety. You're clearly not from around here. You have family somewhere. Someone who can take you in." The mention of family brought fresh tears to Norah's eyes. "I was traveling to San Francisco. My aunt lives there. My parents died of influenza in Boston, and I had nowhere else to go." She brushed the tears away angrily. "The stage-coach was attacked outside of Tucson. I've been passed around by different men since then." A muscle twitched in Hayes's jaw. "I'm sorry that happened to you. This territory can be lawless, but what those men did was criminal everywhere." He hesitated. "San Francisco is a long journey from here. I can't take you all that way, but I can get you to Prescott. There's a proper U.S. Marshal's office there and regular stage service to California." Hope, fragile but real, flickered in Norah's chest for the first time in weeks. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Hayes led Rusty out of the stall. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world to last several lifetimes. Helping you is the right thing to do." He offered her a canteen. "Drink some water." "We should leave now. while most of those men are still occupied with the auction. Norah accepted the water gratefully, drinking deeply before handing it back. As Hayes helped her mount the horse, she remained wary but desperate enough to accept his help. Whatever his true motivations, leaving Castle Dome with this stranger couldn't possibly be worse than the fate that had awaited her at the auction. Hayes swung up behind her, his chest solid against her back as he reached around her to take the reins. "Keep your head down as we ride out," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Some of those men might not take kindly to losing their merchandise. Norah tensed at the proximity but did as instructed, pulling Hayes's coat more tightly around herself and lowering her head as they rode slowly through town. No one stopped them, though she felt the weight of many eyes following their progress. Only when the ramshackle buildings of Castle Dome had fallen away behind them, and the vast expanse of the Arizona desert stretched before them, did Norah allow herself to relax fractionally. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, the warm solidity of Hayes Cooper at her back, and the first tendrils of freedom wrapping around her heart combined to unleash the emotional storm she'd been holding back. Silent tears became quiet sobs, and then she was crying in earnest, her whole body shaking with the release of terror and the fragile bloom of hope. Hayes said nothing, simply steadying her with one arm while he guided Rusty with the other, giving her the space to purge some of her trauma without comment or judgment. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert landscape in golds and reds, Norah's tears gradually subsided. She straightened her back, wiped her face with the sleeve of Hayes's coat, and found her voice again. "Thank you," she said simply, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. Hayes nodded, though she couldn't see the gesture. "We'll make camp soon. There's a small spring about an hour's ride from here where we can rest for the night. Tomorrow we'll start for Prescott. Are you from around here?" Norah asked, seeking to fill the silence with something other than her thoughts. "No," Hayes replied. "I was born in Missouri, came west after the war. You fought in the Civil War." "Yes, Union side." His tone didn't invite further questions on that topic. "Been moving around since then. Working ranches, doing some scouting for the Army, taking odd jobs. What brought you to Castle Dome? It doesn't seem like the sort of place decent people visit willingly." Hayes was silent for so long that Norah thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was tracking someone, a man who's done some very bad things. Trail led me there." Norah processed this information. "Are you a lawman?" "Not officially. Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to find this particular individual." The cryptic answer raised more questions than it answered, but Norah sensed Hayes wouldn't elaborate further. Instead, she asked, "Did you find him? The man you were looking for?" "No, but I found you instead." There was a hint of something softer in his voice. Maybe that was meant to be. Norah didn't know how to respond to that, so she remained silent as they continued their journey across the desert. The landscape seemed endless red rocks and sand, sparse vegetation, and the occasional cactus standing sentinel under the vast blue sky. Despite the heat and her exhaustion, Norah found herself appreciating the wild beauty around them. After weeks of being held in dark rooms or covered wagons, the openness felt like another form of freedom. True to Hayes's word, they reached a small spring as dusk was settling over the land. A cluster of cottonwood trees marked the water source, providing welcome shade and shelter. Hayes helped Norah dismount, her legs stiff and sore from the unaccustomed horseback riding. "Rest here," he said, guiding her to sit on a large flat rock near the water. "I'll take care of Rusty and set up camp." Norah watched as he efficiently unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down, and secured him where he could graze on the sparse grass near the spring. Then Hayes gathered wood for a small fire, moving with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to life in the wilderness. Despite her lingering wariness, Norah found herself admiring his capability and the economical grace of his movements. When the fire was crackling cheerfully, Hayes rummaged in his saddlebags and produced some jerky, hardtack, and dried fruit. "It's not much," he apologized, offering the simple fare to Norah, "but it's better than nothing." To Norah, who had been given barely enough to keep her alive during her captivity, it seemed a feast. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Hayes watching her from across the fire. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Norah swallowed a piece of jerky. "I'm not sure. The days blurred together." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Those men should hang for what they did." "They probably won't," Norah said matter-of-factly. "Men like that seem to do as they please out here." "Not always," Hayes countered. "There's still justice to be found in the territory, even if it sometimes has to come from unexpected places." Something in his tone made Norah study him more carefully. In the firelight, the scar on his cheek stood out starkly against his tanned skin. There was a hardness to his features that spoke of a man who had seen much of the world's darkness, yet his eyes held no cruelty when they met hers. "Who are you really, Mr. Cooper?" she asked directly. "You're clearly not just a drifter." Hayes poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "I told you, I'm tracking someone. A criminal? Are you a bounty hunter?" "Something like that," he conceded. "The man I'm looking for. He led a gang that attacked a settlement in northern Arizona 2 years ago. Killed everyone there, including women and children." His voice remained steady, but Norah could sense the tightly controlled emotion beneath his words. "I've been following his trail ever since." "Was someone you knew there?" "In the settlement?" Norah asked gently. Hayes met her gaze directly across the flames. "My sister and her husband, their son too. My nephew was just 5 years old." Norah's heart constricted at the pain evident in his expression. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "No wonder you're hunting him." "Every lead I've had has gone cold eventually," Hayes continued. "But this time, I heard he'd been seen near Castle Dome. By the time I got there, he'd moved on again." He shook his head. "And then I saw what was happening in the square." "And you stopped to help me instead of continuing your search," Norah realized. "You may have lost his trail because of me." Hayes looked at her steadily. "I don't regret it. Some things are more important than revenge." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Norah lowered her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what this stranger had done for her. Not only had he spent a substantial sum to purchase her freedom, but he had potentially sacrificed his chance to find the man who had murdered his family. "Thank you," she said again, the words still insufficient but all she had to offer. Hayes nodded acknowledgement. "You should try to get some sleep, Miss Livingston. We have a long ride tomorrow." Norah hesitated. After weeks of abuse and captivity, the idea of sleeping in the open desert with a man she barely knew was understandably frightening. Hayes seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll stay on the other side of the fire," he assured her. "You're safe with me, I promise." Something in his steady gaze convinced her to trust him, at least for tonight. Hayes offered her his bedroll, insisting he was used to sleeping rough, and Norah finally gave in to her exhaustion. Wrapped in the blanket that smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, she fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks, lulled by the crackling fire and the knowledge that, for now at least, she was truly free. She woke at dawn to find Hayes already up, tending the rekindled fire and brewing coffee in a small pot. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the heat that would come with the rising sun. Norah sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair in a futile attempt to make herself more presentable. "Morning," Hayes greeted her, offering a tin cup of strong black coffee. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," Norah admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. The bitter liquid warmed her from the inside, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. "How far is it to Prescott?" "3 days' ride if we push hard," Hayes replied, studying the eastern horizon as the sun began to appear. "We'll need to stop in a small settlement called Wickenburg on the way to get supplies and find you a horse. Can't expect Rusty to carry double the whole way." Norah nodded, sipping her coffee as she considered the journey ahead. 3 days with this enigmatic man who had saved her from a fate worse than death. 3 days before she would need to figure out how to continue on to San Francisco alone. "You still plan to go to your aunt's?" Hayes asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Yes. She's the only family I have left," Norah confirmed. "I wrote to her before leaving Boston, but I doubt she knows what happened to me. She's probably worried sick." Hayes nodded. "Once we reach Prescott, you can send a telegraph. Let her know you're coming." He hesitated. "Do you have money for the stage fare?" Norah's face fell. "Everything I had was taken when the coach was attacked. My trunk with all my possessions, my purse with my savings." She looked down at her tattered dress, visible beneath Hayes's coat which she still wore. "I have nothing." Hayes was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "We'll figure something out." He turned away to pack up their small camp, and Norah watched him, wondering again at this strange man who kept helping her without hesitation. They were on the trail again within the hour, Norah once more seated in front of Hayes on Rusty's broad back. The desert landscape gradually changed as they rode west, the terrain becoming more varied with rocky outcroppings and deeper arroyos. Hayes pointed out landmarks and identified plants and animals they passed, sharing his knowledge of the territory in a quiet, matter-of-fact way that Norah found both educational and comforting. By midday, the sun was blazing overhead, and Norah was grateful for the wide brim of the spare hat Hayes had given her from his saddlebags. They stopped briefly in the shade of a large rock formation to rest and water Rusty at a small seep Hayes knew of. As Norah stretched her legs, wincing at the soreness from the unaccustomed riding, she noticed Hayes scanning the horizon with a slight frown. "Is something wrong?" she asked, following his gaze but seeing nothing but empty desert. Hayes shook his head. "Just being cautious. This is Apache territory, though they generally stay further east these days, and there are always outlaws to consider." "Like the men who attacked my stagecoach?" Norah asked, a chill running through her despite the heat. "Perhaps." Hayes turned to look at her directly. "Which is why I want you to take this." He removed a small revolver from his saddlebag and held it out to her. "Do you know how to use a gun?" Norah hesitated before taking the weapon. "My father taught me to shoot when I was younger. He believed women should know how to protect themselves." "But it's been years." "The principle remains the same," Hayes said. "Point and pull the trigger. It's already loaded 5 shots. Keep it tucked in your pocket just in case." "In case of what?" Norah asked, though she carefully stored the revolver in the pocket of Hayes's coat. "In case we get separated, in case something happens to me." His blue eyes were serious. "I don't expect trouble, but out here, it's better to be prepared." The weight of the gun in her pocket was both reassuring and frightening. Norah nodded her understanding, and they resumed their journey, the sun tracking steadily across the sky as Rusty carried them westward. Late in the afternoon, they crested a low rise and Hayes reined in, pointing to the distance where a cluster of buildings marked the location of Wickenburg. "We'll reach it by nightfall," he said. "It's a mining town mostly, but decent enough. There's a hotel where you can get a proper bath and a good night's sleep." The prospect of clean clothes, hot water, and a real bed nearly brought tears to Nora's eyes. "That sounds like heaven," she admitted. Hayes chuckled, the sound surprising her after his generally serious demeanor. "I imagine it does. Don't get too excited, though frontier accommodations aren't exactly up to Boston standards. After what I've been through, Mr. Cooper, a hay-filled mattress in a barn would feel luxurious," Norah assured him with a small smile. They rode on, the settlement growing slowly larger as they approached. Norah found herself becoming tense as they neared civilization again. Her experience in Castle Dome had left her wary of frontier towns and the men who populated them. "Wickenburg is different," Hayes said quietly, sensing her anxiety. "There's a proper sheriff here, families. It's rough around the edges but not lawless." Norah nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. As they finally rode down the main street, she saw that Hayes was right while still clearly a frontier town with its wooden buildings and dusty streets. Wickenburg had an air of permanence and relative respectability. Women in calico dresses walked alongside men in work clothes. There were children playing, and signs advertising legitimate businesses like a general store, a blacksmith, and a hotel. Hayes guided Rusty to a hitching post outside the modestly named Wickenburg Hotel. As he helped Norah dismount, she was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the curious glances from passers-by. Hayes, however, acted as if escorting a woman in a torn dress and a man's coat was the most natural thing in the world. "Wait here while I arrange for rooms," he said, helping her to a bench outside the hotel. "I'll be right back." Norah sat nervously, avoiding eye contact with the townspeople who passed by. A woman across the street stared openly, whispering to her companion while pointing discreetly in Norah's direction. Norah hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller beneath Hayes's coat. Hayes returned shortly, relief evident on his face. "They have 2 rooms available. I've arranged for hot water to be sent up to yours immediately." He offered his arm. "Come on, let's get you inside." The hotel's interior was simple but clean, with a small lobby featuring worn but polished wooden floors and a modest desk. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, gave Norah an appraising look but made no comment about her appearance. Hayes collected the keys and led Norah up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the building. "It's not much," he apologized as he opened the door, "but it's clean and secure." The room was indeed small, containing little more than a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a 3-legged stool, and a small mirror hanging on the wall. To Norah, however, it looked like a palace after weeks of captivity and a night sleeping on the ground. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. Hayes nodded. "My room is just next door. There should be someone bringing up water soon. Once you've had a chance to clean up and rest, we can see about getting you some proper clothes and something to eat." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. 2 young boys struggled in with a large copper tub, followed by several trips carrying buckets of steaming water. Hayes tipped them generously and then turned back to Norah. "I'll leave you to your bath," he said. "Take your time. I'm going to see to Rusty and some other business in town. I'll knock on your door in 2 hours. Will that be enough time?" Norah nodded gratefully. "More than enough." "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." After Hayes left, Norah locked the door behind him and approached the tub of hot water with something akin to reverence. Shedding Hayes's coat and her ruined dress, she slipped into the bath with a sigh of pure pleasure. The hot water seemed to wash away not just the physical dirt of her ordeal, but some of the emotional trauma as well. She scrubbed herself thoroughly with the small cake of soap provided, washed her hair twice, and stayed in the water until it began to cool. When she finally emerged, she was faced with the problem of clothing. Her dress was beyond salvaging, and she couldn't continue wearing Hayes's coat indefinitely. She was contemplating this dilemma when another knock came at the door. "Miss Livingston." "It's Sarah Reynolds, the hotel proprietor," called a woman's voice. Cautiously, Norah wrapped herself in the thin towel provided and cracked open the door. The woman she had seen at the desk stood there holding a bundle of fabric. "Your friend explained your situation, Mrs. Reynolds said, her expression softening slightly as she took in Norah's clean but clearly traumatized appearance. "I brought you some things that might fit. They're simple, but clean and whole." Overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness, Norah could only nod and accept the bundle. "Thank you," she managed. "How much do I owe you?" Mrs. Reynolds waved away the question. "Mr. Cooper has taken care of everything. Rest now, dear. You look like you've been through the ringer." After the door closed, Norah examined the clothing, a simple dark blue calico dress. Modest but perfectly serviceable, along with necessary undergarments, a nightgown, and even a pair of worn but intact boots that looked to be approximately her size. The generosity brought tears to her eyes. She dressed carefully, relieved to be in clean, proper clothing again. The dress was a little loose, but she managed to adjust it well enough. Looking in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner than she remembered, with shadows under her eyes speaking of her ordeal, but the worst of the dirt and grime was gone. She used her fingers to comb through her damp hair, arranging it as neatly as possible. True to his word, Hayes knocked on her door precisely 2 hours after leaving. When she opened it, she saw a flash of something in his eyes as he took in her transformed appearance, surprise, perhaps, and something warmer that he quickly masked. "You look much better," he said, clearing his throat. "The dress suits you." "Mrs. Reynolds was very kind," Norah replied. "As have you been, Mr. Cooper. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for everything you've done." Hayes shook his head. "No repayment necessary. Are you hungry?" "The hotel dining room isn't fancy, but the food is good." The mention of a proper meal made Norah's stomach growl audibly, causing a slight blush to color her cheeks. "Starving, actually," she admitted. The dining room downstairs was simple but clean, with several tables covered in checkered cloths. Only a few other diners were present, but Norah still felt self-conscious as Hayes led her to a table in the corner. She was acutely aware of her status as a woman alone with a man who was neither her husband nor a relative, a scandalous situation in Boston society, though frontier rules seemed more relaxed by necessity. Hayes ordered for both of them hearty beef stew with fresh bread and coffee. As they waited for the food, Norah found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. In the lamplight of the dining room, with the trail dust washed away, Hayes Cooper was a strikingly handsome man. His blue eyes stood out against his tanned skin, and his dark hair, still damp from his own washing up, curled slightly at the temples. The scar on his cheek only added to his rugged appeal rather than detracting from it. "You're staring, Miss Livingston," Hayes observed quietly, a hint of amusement in his voice. Norah quickly looked down at the table, embarrassed. "I apologize. I was just thinking how different you look when you're not covered in trail dust." "I could say the same about you," he replied. "You clean up remarkably well for someone who's been through what you have." Their food arrived before Norah could formulate a response. The stew was simple but delicious, the meat tender and the gravy rich. The fresh bread, still warm from the oven, was the best thing Norah had tasted in weeks. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Hayes watching her with a mixture of concern and satisfaction. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked again, echoing his question from the night before. Norah considered. Before the stagecoach attack, I suppose. They fed me enough to keep me alive during my captivity, but nothing substantial. Hayes's jaw tightened, that now familiar flash of anger crossing his features before he controlled it. Well, eat as much as you want now. You need to regain your strength. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Norah gathered the courage to ask, "What happened today, while I was resting? Did you make progress with your business in town?" Hayes nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "I arranged for a horse for you, nothing fancy, but a reliable mare that should get you to Prescott comfortably. And I sent some telegrams." "Telegrams?" Norah asked, curious. "One to the marshal in Prescott, letting him know about the illegal slave auction in Castle Dome. One to a colleague of mine, asking if he's heard anything about the man I'm tracking." Hayes hesitated, then added, "And one to the bank in Prescott, arranging for funds to be available when we arrive." Norah set down her spoon, her brow furrowed. "Funds? What for?" "For your stage passage to San Francisco," Hayes said matter-of-factly. "And some money to get you started once you're there." Norah stared at him, astonished. "Mr. Cooper, that's far too generous. I can't possibly accept—" "You can and you will," Hayes interrupted firmly. "I told you I'd see you safely on your way, and I meant it. Consider it an advance if your pride requires it. You can repay me once you're settled and working." "But it's too much," Norah protested. "You've already spent $300 to free me, plus the cost of this hotel, the clothing, the horse." Hayes leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Miss Livingston, Norah, money means little to me. I have more than enough for my needs. What matters is seeing justice done and helping those who need it." His voice softened. "Please, let me do this for you." Something in his earnest expression made further argument impossible. Norah nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Though thank you seems woefully inadequate for everything you've done." Hayes sat back, the intensity fading from his expression. "You're welcome. Now finish your stew before it gets cold." The rest of the meal passed in more comfortable conversation, with Hayes asking about Norah's life in Boston and her family. She found herself sharing stories of her childhood, her parents, and the circumstances that had led her to journey west. Hayes was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and seeming genuinely interested in her answers. In turn, Norah gently probed for more information about him, though Hayes remained somewhat reticent about his past. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, fought through most of the Civil War, and afterward had drifted west like so many other restless young men. He mentioned his sister again. Hannah had been 10 years older than him, practically raising him after their mother died young. "She was the best person I ever knew," Hayes said quietly, pain evident in his voice despite the years that had passed since her death. "Kind, brave, always standing up for what was right. When she married and moved to Arizona Territory, I followed a few years later. Wanted to be near the only family I had left. But you were too late," Norah said softly, understanding, filling in the gaps of his story. "When you arrived, they were already gone. The settlement burned to the ground. 12 people murdered, including Hannah, her husband John, and my nephew Thomas." Hayes's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "The territorial authorities investigated, but the trail went cold, so I took up the search myself." "And you've been hunting the men responsible ever since," Norah concluded. Hayes nodded, his expression hardening. "One man in particular, Nathan Blackwell. He leads the gang that did it. Most of his men have met justice one way or another over the years, but Blackwell himself has always managed to stay one step ahead of me." "That's why you were in Castle Dome," Norah realized. "You had information he was there." "A reliable tip that he'd been seen in the area," Hayes confirmed. But by the time I arrived, he'd moved on. Story of my life these past 2 years. He shook his head as if to dispel the dark memories. Enough about that. Tell me more about your aunt in San Francisco. What's she like? Norah recognized the deliberate change of subject, but allowed it, understanding that Hayes's pain ran deep. She described her Aunt Alina, her father's sister, who had moved to California during the gold rush with her husband and had remained there after his death, building a successful millinery business. She's quite the businesswoman, Norah explained. Independent, strong-willed. My father always said she was born ahead of her time. Her letters made San Francisco sound so exciting and full of opportunity. That's why I decided to join her after my parents died. Sounds like a remarkable woman, Hayes observed. You must take after her. Norah blinked in surprise. Me? I'm nothing special, Mr. Cooper. I disagree, Hayes said quietly. Most women would have broken under the ordeal you've endured. Yet here you sit, planning your future, your spirit intact. That takes exceptional strength. Unused to such direct compliments, Norah felt warmth spread across her cheeks. Perhaps it simply hasn't caught up with me yet, she suggested. I expect I'll fall apart properly once I'm safely in San Francisco. A small smile tugged at Hayes's mouth. Somehow I doubt that. But if you do, I suspect you'll put yourself back together again just as quickly. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Norah was the first to look away, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of the situation and the unfamiliar feeling stirring within her. It's getting late, she said, noting the emptiness of the dining room. We should probably rest if we're to continue our journey tomorrow. Hayes nodded, rising to pull out her chair. As they walked upstairs to their rooms, Norah was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid and reassuring. At her door, they paused. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Cooper, she said formally, trying to maintain some sense of propriety. Hayes, he corrected gently. After everything we've been through, I think you can use my given name. Hayes, Norah repeated, the name feeling strange but pleasant on her lips. Then you must call me Norah. Norah, he said, the single word somehow imbued with meaning in his deep voice. Sleep well. We'll leave after breakfast tomorrow. He waited until she had entered her room and closed the door before she heard his footsteps moving to the adjacent room. Norah leaned against the door, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted, confused by her reaction to this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. She was being foolish, she told herself firmly. Hayes Cooper had saved her out of a sense of justice and human decency, not out of any particular interest in her. Whatever warmth she had seen in his eyes was simply compassion for her plight. Once he delivered her to Prescott, he would continue his hunt for Nathan Blackwell, and she would go on to San Francisco. Their paths had crossed briefly, but would soon diverge again. Despite this sensible reasoning, Norah found herself lying awake long into the night, thinking of blue eyes and a gentle voice saying, "You're free." Morning came with the sounds of the town waking wagon wheels on the street below, voices calling greetings, a dog barking somewhere nearby. Norah rose early, washing her face in the basin and dressing in her new clothing. She had just finished arranging her hair as best she could without proper pins when a knock came at her door. Hayes stood in the hallway, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. Without his customary stubble, he looked younger, though no less formidable. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Norah replied, though in truth she had tossed and turned for hours. "Is it time for breakfast?" "Indeed it is." "And afterward, I have something to show you." Curious, Norah followed him downstairs to the dining room where they enjoyed a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. Hayes ate quickly, clearly eager to be on with whatever he had planned. "Come on," he said once they had finished, leading her outside to where Rusty stood hitched alongside a smaller, dun-colored mare. "This is Penny. She's yours for the journey to Prescott." Norah approached the horse cautiously. The mare regarded her with gentle brown eyes, neither skittish nor overly excited by her presence. "She's lovely," Norah said, carefully stroking the animal's neck. "But I haven't ridden much, mostly side saddle, and that was years ago." "Penny's patient and smooth-gaited," Hayes assured her. "She'll take care of you, and look," he gestured to the saddle, which was indeed a woman's side saddle. The livery owner had this stashed away. His wife used it before she passed on last winter. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Norah smiled. "Thank you. This will make the journey much more comfortable." "That's not all," Hayes continued, reaching into his saddlebag. "I found these at the general store." He produced a small bundle wrapped in paper and handed it to her. Norah unwrapped the package to find a hairbrush, some pins, a small hand mirror, and a cake of lavender-scented soap. Simple items, but to someone who had lost everything, they represented a return to normalcy that brought tears to her eyes. "Hayes, I don't know what to say," she murmured, clutching the modest gifts. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, seeming almost embarrassed by her emotional reaction. "I just thought you might appreciate some essentials for the journey." Norah impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "It's very thoughtful, thank you." Their eyes met again, that same inexplicable connection flaring between them. Hayes cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should get moving if we want to make good progress today. Do you need help mounting?" The next 2 days of travel passed more comfortably than the first. With her own horse and proper clothing, Norah found herself enjoying the journey despite its purpose. The landscape continued to change as they headed north, becoming more varied with pine-covered hills appearing in the distance. Hayes was a patient teacher, showing her how to care for Penny and sharing his knowledge of the territory they traversed. They camped under the stars again the second night, but this time Norah felt no fear sleeping near Hayes. They talked long into the evening, sharing stories and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Hayes spoke of his time in the Union Army, the horrors he had witnessed at Shiloh and Gettysburg, and his difficulty adjusting to civilian life afterward. Norah told him about losing her parents to influenza, nursing them through their final days, and the lonely months that followed as she sorted out their affairs. "It's strange," Norah mused, gazing into the campfire. "A week ago, I had given up hope entirely. Now here I am, planning for the future again." "Hope is resilient," Hayes said, "like certain desert plants that can survive years without water, then bloom spectacularly after a single rain." Norah looked at him curiously. "That's quite poetic for a man who tracks outlaws for a living." Hayes smiled slightly. "I wasn't always this rough around the edges. I used to read a great deal before." He trailed off, but Norah understood, before grief and vengeance had become the driving forces in his life. "What will you do," she asked softly, "if you ever find Nathan Blackwell?" Hayes was silent for a long moment. "I used to think I knew exactly what I'd do," he finally said. "But now I'm not so certain. Justice doesn't always look the way we expect it to." There was something in his voice, a hint of change, of shifting perspective that gave Norah hope for this man who had saved her. Perhaps in rescuing her, he had begun to rescue himself as well, finding a purpose beyond revenge. The third day of their journey brought Prescott into view, a substantial settlement nestled among ponderosa pines, much larger and more developed than either Castle Dome or Wickenburg. As they rode into town in the late afternoon, Norah was struck by the relative civilization of the place, with its proper wooden sidewalks, glass-windowed storefronts, and impressive courthouse in the town square. "It's almost like a real city," she commented as they made their way down Montezuma Street, the main thoroughfare. Hayes nodded. "Prescott's the territorial capital. Has been since '64, except for a brief period when they moved it to Tucson. You'll find it considerably more civilized than what you've seen so far." They stopped first at the marshal's office, where Hayes introduced himself to Marshal Simmons, a grizzled older man with a no-nonsense demeanor. Norah waited nervously as Hayes explained the situation in Castle Dome, giving details of the illegal slave auction and the men involved. To her relief, the marshal took the information seriously, making notes and promising to send deputies to investigate. "And the young lady?" Marshal Simmons asked, eyeing Norah with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. "What's her situation?" "Miss Livingston was one of their captives," Hayes explained. "I'm seeing her safely to the stage to San Francisco where she has family waiting." The marshal's expression softened slightly. "I see. Well, miss, you're lucky this man found you. Cooper here has quite a reputation for finding trouble and fixing it." He looked back at Hayes. "Any sign of Blackwell?" Hayes shook his head. "Trail went cold in Castle Dome. Heard he might be heading north, though." "I'll keep my ear to the ground," the marshal promised. "You staying in town long?" "Just until Miss Livingston's stage departs," Hayes replied. "Day after tomorrow if the schedule holds." After leaving the marshal's office, they secured rooms at the Palace Hotel, a substantial two-story establishment that was indeed palatial compared to their previous accommodations. The lobby featured polished floors, proper upholstered furniture, and even a small chandelier. Norah felt distinctly underdressed in her simple calico as Hayes arranged for their rooms. "The dining room serves dinner until 8, the clerk informed them, "and there's hot water available for baths upon request." "Thank you," Hayes replied, passing him payment for 2 nights' stay. "Please have water sent up to Miss Livingston's room immediately." As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Norah felt a strange reluctance growing within her. Their journey was nearly over. In 2 days, she would board the stage to California, and Hayes would continue his hunt for Nathan Blackwell. The thought left her with an unexpected emptiness. At her door, Hayes handed her the key. "I need to stop by the bank before it closes," he explained. "Take your time resting and freshening up. I'll meet you for dinner at 7 if that suits you." "That would be lovely," Norah replied, trying to keep her voice light despite the heaviness in her chest. "Thank you, Hayes." He nodded, his blue eyes studying her face as if memorizing it, then turned and headed back downstairs. Norah entered her room larger and more comfortable than the one in Wickenburg, with an actual wardrobe, a writing desk, and a proper bed with a headboard, and sank onto the edge of the mattress. She should be happy, she told herself firmly. In just a few days, she would be with her aunt in San Francisco, ready to begin a new life far from the horrors she had experienced. Yet all she could think about was Hayes Cooper, and the way her heart seemed to speed up whenever he was near. It was absurd, of course. They had known each other less than a week. Whatever she was feeling was simply gratitude mixed with the heightened emotions of her rescue. Hayes himself had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than someone in need of help, a responsibility he had taken on out of his innate sense of justice. The arrival of hot water for her bath interrupted these troubling thoughts. Norah forced herself to focus on the present, on the luxury of a proper bath in a proper hotel, and the prospect of dinner with Hayes in a civilized dining room. Tomorrow would be soon enough to worry about their inevitable parting. Freshly bathed and with her hair properly arranged for the first time in weeks, Norah made her way downstairs at 7 o'clock. The hotel dining room was elegant by frontier standards, with tablecloths, proper china, and even fresh flowers in small vases on each table. She hesitated in the doorway, scanning the room for Hayes. He stood as soon as he saw her, and Norah's breath caught at the sight of him. He had clearly taken advantage of the hotel's amenities as well, dressed now in a clean dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was neatly combed, and in the warm lamplight he looked like a different man entirely from the trail-worn cowboy who had rescued her. "You look beautiful," Hayes said simply as she approached the table, pulling out a chair for her. Norah felt color rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself." He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Amazing what a hot bath and clean clothes can do. Dinner was the most pleasant meal Norah could remember having in months. The food was excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and apple pie for dessert, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Hayes seemed more relaxed than she had seen him before, as if the burden he carried had lightened somewhat during their journey together. "I arranged everything at the bank," he told her as they lingered over coffee after the meal. "They'll have money ready for you tomorrow, enough for your stage fare to San Francisco and a comfortable start once you're there." "Hayes, it's too generous," Norah protested again. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Live well," he said simply. "Be happy, that's repayment enough." The sincerity in his voice silenced her objections. Instead, she asked, "What will you do now? Continue searching for Blackwell?" Hayes stared into his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "For 2 years hunting him has been my only purpose, but lately—" He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Lately, I've been wondering if there might be more to life than revenge." Norah's heart quickened at his words and the intensity of his gaze. "What changed?" she asked softly. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "I think I did," he finally said. "Or maybe I'm starting to remember the man I was before grief consumed me, the man my sister would have wanted me to be." "And who was that man?" Norah asked. "Someone who fought for justice, not vengeance. Someone who built things up instead of tearing them down." He shook his head slightly. "I've been so focused on Blackwell that I lost sight of everything else." "Until Castle Dome," Norah suggested. "Until you chose to help me instead of continuing your hunt." "Yes," Hayes agreed, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Until you." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Norah felt herself trembling slightly, afraid to misinterpret his words, yet unable to dismiss the connection that had grown between them. "Hayes," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but feeling the need to speak. A commotion at the dining room entrance interrupted her. A man in a deputy marshal's uniform stood in the doorway, scanning the room urgently. When his eyes landed on their table, he strode quickly toward them. "Mr. Cooper?" the deputy asked, his expression grim. "Marshal Simmons needs to see you right away. It's about Blackwell." Hayes's entire demeanor changed instantly, the relaxed man of moments ago replaced by the hard-eyed hunter Norah had first met. He rose from his chair. "What about him?" "He's been spotted just north of town," the deputy explained. "A rancher recognized him from the wanted posters. Marshall's organizing a posse to ride at first light." Hayes nodded sharply. "I'll be right there." He turned to Norah, regret evident in his expression. "I'm sorry, but I have to go." "Of course," Norah said, though her heart sank at the abrupt end to their evening. "This is what you've been waiting for." Hayes hesitated, clearly torn between his long-held mission and the conversation they had been having. "We'll talk tomorrow," he promised, briefly touching her hand. before anything happens." Norah nodded, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Go. I understand." She watched as he followed the deputy from the dining room, his tall figure disappearing through the door. The emptiness she had felt earlier returned stronger now. Whatever Hayes had been about to say, whatever might have been developing between them, had been interrupted by the ghost that had haunted him for 2 years. Nathan Blackwell. The man whose actions had set Hayes on his path of vengeance. The man whose capture or death might finally bring Hayes peace, or might simply leave him empty. His purpose fulfilled, but his soul still wounded. Norah finished her coffee alone, then retired to her room. Sleep eluded her as she thought of Hayes meeting with the marshal, planning the pursuit of Blackwell. She wondered what would happen when they found him. Would Hayes kill the man in cold blood? Would that bring the closure he sought? And afterward, what then? Morning came with no sign of Hayes. When Norah inquired at the front desk, the clerk informed her that Mr. Cooper had left with Marshal Simmons and several other men before dawn. He had left no message for her. Trying to ignore her disappointment, Norah focused on the practical matters at hand. She collected the money Hayes had arranged for her at the bank, purchased a few necessary items at the general store, and confirmed her reservation on the westbound stage scheduled to depart the following morning. All the while, her thoughts remained with Hayes. Had they caught up to Blackwell yet? Was Hayes in danger? Would he return before her stage left, or had their abrupt goodbye in the dining room been their last? By evening, with no word from Hayes or the posse, Norah found herself increasingly anxious. She ate dinner alone in the hotel dining room, the meal tasteless despite the cook's best efforts. Afterward, unable to face the confines of her room, she stepped outside onto the hotel's small veranda, breathing in the cool night air. Prescott was quiet at this hour, with only a few establishments still showing lights along Montezuma Street. In the distance, Norah could see the silhouette of Thumb Butt against the star-filled sky, the distinctive rock formation Hayes had pointed out as they approached town. The sight reminded her of his quiet voice explaining the landmarks, the patient way he had taught her about life in the territory, the gentle humor that occasionally broke through his serious demeanor. A commotion from the direction of the marshal's office drew her attention. Several riders were approaching, their horses moving slowly as if tired from a long journey. Norah's heart leapt as she recognized Hayes's broad-shouldered figure among them. Without thinking, she gathered her skirts and hurried down the steps of the veranda, moving quickly along the wooden sidewalk toward the group. As she drew closer, she could see that one of the horses carried a body draped across the saddle, presumably secured there. Another man rode with his arm in a makeshift sling, his face grimacing with pain. The riders stopped in front of the marshal's office. Hayes dismounted wearily, then helped the injured man down from his horse. It was only as he turned to assist with the body on the third horse that he noticed Norah standing nearby. "Norah," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the riders returning," she explained, her eyes moving to the body. "Is that Nathan Blackwell?" Hayes confirmed, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the office windows. "He's dead. Did you?" Norah couldn't finish the question. Hayes shook his head. "He drew on the marshal when we confronted him. Deputy Ellis here took a bullet in the arm and I returned fire." His voice was flat, emotionless. "It's over." Norah didn't know what to say. The moment Hayes had worked toward for 2 years had finally come, yet he seemed neither triumphant nor relieved, just tired. "I need to help with the body and give my statement to the marshal," Hayes continued. "It might be a while." "I'll wait," Norah said impulsively. "At the hotel." Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come find you when I'm done." Norah returned to the hotel, settling into a chair in the quiet lobby to wait. An hour passed, then two. The clerk offered her coffee, which she accepted gratefully as the night deepened. She had almost dozed off when Hayes finally appeared, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You didn't have to wait up," he said, dropping into the chair opposite her. "I wanted to," Norah replied simply. "Are you all right?" Hayes was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent 2 years living for this moment. Now it's here and I feel—" He shook his head. "Empty, I guess. It doesn't bring them back. Hannah, John, little Thomas, they're still gone." "But the man who killed them has faced justice," Norah pointed out gently. "Doesn't that mean something?" "It should," Hayes agreed. "And maybe it will in time. But right now, all I can think is, what do I do now? Who am I if not the man hunting Nathan Blackwell?" Norah reached across the small table between them, taking his hand in hers. "You're Hayes Cooper. The man who saw a woman being sold like property and spent $300 to free her instead of continuing his hunt. The man who treated her with kindness and respect when she expected only more cruelty. The man who gave her back her hope." She squeezed his hand. "That's who you are." Hayes looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, the weariness giving way to a warmth that made Norah's breath catch. "My stage leaves tomorrow morning," she said softly. "Early." "I know," Hayes replied. "I checked the schedule. I was afraid I wouldn't see you again before I left." Hayes turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I promised we would talk." "Yes, you did." Norah hesitated, gathering her courage. "Last night at dinner before the deputy interrupted us. What were you going to say?" Hayes studied her face for a long moment, as if making a decision. "I was going to say that meeting you changed something in me, reminded me that there's more to life than revenge, that there could be—" He paused, searching for words. "That there could be a future worth living for, not just a past worth avenging." Norah's heart beat faster at his words. "And now that Blackwell is dead, now I'm free," Hayes said, echoing the words he had spoken to her in Castle Dome. "Free to decide what comes next, free to—" He faltered, then continued more firmly. "Free to ask if you might consider staying, or at least allowing me to accompany you to San Francisco." Norah stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "You want me to stay here in Prescott?" "Or I could come with you to San Francisco," Hayes said quickly. "Or anywhere else you want to go. I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other a short time. But I also know that when I'm with you, I remember the man I used to be, the man I want to be again." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking for promises, Norah. Just time. Time to see if what I'm feeling, what I think we both might be feeling, is real." Tears welled in Norah's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that once Blackwell was gone, you would disappear too. That whatever has been growing between us would end before it had a chance to begin." Hayes reached out with his free hand, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere, not unless you want me to." "I don't," Norah said firmly. "I don't want you to go anywhere." The smile that spread across Hayes's face transformed him, erasing the lines of weariness and grief. In that moment, Norah could see the man he had been before tragedy had hardened him, and the man he could be again. "What about your aunt?" Hayes asked. "She's expecting you in San Francisco." "I'll send her a telegram in the morning," Norah decided. "Explain that I've been delayed but that I'm safe. Perhaps—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "Perhaps we could visit her together once we've had time to see where this leads." Hayes nodded, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I'd like that." They sat in the quiet lobby, hands joined, talking softly as the night deepened around them. Hayes spoke of his relief that Blackwell was gone, but also of his uncertainty about the future. Norah shared her dreams of a new life in the West, different now from when she had left Boston, expanded to include possibilities she hadn't imagined before. As dawn approached, they moved to the hotel's veranda to watch the sunrise together. The eastern sky lightened gradually, painting the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. Hayes stood beside Norah, his arm around her shoulders, both of them silent as the new day began. "It's beautiful," Norah murmured, leaning against him. "Yes, it is," Hayes agreed, but when she glanced up, she found him looking not at the sunrise but at her. The tenderness in his expression made her heart swell, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Hayes bent his head toward hers. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Norah responded. When they finally separated, both were breathing faster, and Hayes's eyes had darkened to the color of a stormy sky. "I've wanted to do that since Wickenburg," he admitted, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've wanted you to," Norah confessed, her cheeks flushed. "I just wasn't sure if you felt the same way." Hayes brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I wasn't sure I had the right to feel anything with Blackwell still out there, but now—" He shook his head, wonder in his expression. "Now I can think about the future instead of the past, and I want you to be part of that future, Norah, if you'll have me." "I will," she promised. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the sun rose fully over Prescott, Norah Livingston and Hayes Cooper stood side by side, their shadows stretching long behind them, their faces turned toward the light. The journey that had brought them together had ended, but another journey, one they would share, was just beginning. Over the following months, Hayes and Norah built a life together in Prescott. With the reward money for Blackwell's capture, Hayes purchased a small ranch outside of town, with good water and enough grazing land for a modest herd. Norah sent for her trunk of belongings from Boston and wrote long letters to her aunt in San Francisco, explaining her change of plans and introducing Hayes through her words. They were married that autumn, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Prescott. Marshall Simmons stood as Hayes's best man, and Mrs. Reynolds from the Wickenburg Hotel traveled up for the occasion, taking a motherly interest in Norah's preparations. When Hayes slipped a simple gold band onto Norah's finger and promised to cherish her all the days of his life, the joy in his blue eyes erased the last shadows of his vengeful past. Their ranch prospered under their combined care. Hayes's knowledge of the land and animals, paired with Norah's organizational skills and determined spirit, made them a formidable team. They built a comfortable home, planted an orchard and garden, and gradually increased their herd. Occasionally, Hayes still rode with Marshall Simmons when dangerous outlaws threatened the territory, his skills as a tracker and marksman too valuable to remain unused. In the spring of their second year together, Norah gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Hayes's nephew. As Hayes held his son for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, Norah knew that the healing she had witnessed beginning in Castle Dome was complete. The man who had rescued her had found his own redemption in the process. 2 years later, their daughter Hannah arrived, named for the sister Hayes had loved and lost. By then, the ranch had expanded, and Hayes had been appointed a deputy U.S. Marshal, a position that allowed him to continue working for justice while remaining close to his growing family. Norah's Aunt Eleanor finally visited from San Francisco, arriving on the new railroad line that had reached northern Arizona. She approved wholeheartedly of Hayes and the life Norah had built, declaring that her niece had found exactly where she belonged. "I always knew you were meant for something extraordinary," Eleanor told Norah as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching Hayes teach young Thomas to ride his first pony. But I never imagined it would look like this. Norah smiled, cradling baby Hannah in her arms. Neither did I, she admitted. When that stagecoach was attacked, I thought my life was over. I never dreamed it was just beginning. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Hayes took Norah back to the spot where they had camped that first night after leaving Castle Dome, the small spring with the cottonwood trees. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and made the journey alone, retracing the path that had brought them together. As they sat beside a campfire under the stars, Hayes took Norah's hand, his expression serious. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Not continuing to San Francisco?" "Staying here with me instead," Norah shook her head, squeezing his hand. "Never, not for a single moment." "I think about it sometimes," Hayes admitted. "That day in Castle Dome, if I had arrived an hour later or if I had ignored what was happening and continued tracking Blackwell. We might never have met." "But you didn't ignore it," Norah reminded him. "You saw what was happening and you chose to help. That's who you are, Hayes Cooper. That's the man I fell in love with." Hayes pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. "When I untied your bonds and said you're free, I had no idea I was really freeing myself," he said softly. "You saved me as much as I saved you." "Then we're even," Norah murmured, leaning up to kiss him. "And we have the rest of our lives to be grateful for it." Above them, the desert stars shone in brilliant profusion, witnesses to a love that had begun in the darkest of circumstances, but had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Two people who had lost everything had found something precious in each other's strength, healing, and a future built on the solid foundation of shared values and deep affection. As Hayes held Norah close under the vast Arizona sky, both knew that the freedom they had found in each other was the greatest gift of all: the freedom to love, to hope, and to build a life worthy of the second chance they had been given.